Brian Yuzna, horror legend, the producer and director. First of all, welcome to Norway.
Thank you.
What do you think of Ramaskrik 19?
I'm having a great time. It seems like a great location and wonderful people and good screening room. It's wonderful.
And it's a perfect setting for watching horror movies.
It is. It seems very scary outside. Better to stay in.
It's a festival over a long weekend. Have you had the opportunity to watch any films?
Well, I saw The Furies last night.
Yeah.
It's good. Australian film. Kind of a slasher send-up.
Yeah. So you did enjoy that?
Yeah.
You're both a director and a producer. Which of the do you prefer to direct or produce?
I like to do both. If I'm if I'm directing, I also like to be the producer. I like to be the boss, and I like to be able to control things. But if you direct, sometimes it's convenient if you produce also. You need a partner, of course. You can't do it all by yourself. But just because that way you can put the resources where you want them to be. Sometimes when you're directing, the producer or the financiers, they can have a different idea about what is possible or what they should where they should put the resources. So it's good to be able to produce. I started as a producer, so I think my basic mentality is as of a producer. There's something really great about being a producer, which is that you have the movie much longer than anybody. Because even years after the movie's done, you're still doing something with it. Like, for example, with Re-Animator or Society, I'm still putting out another DVD, another Blu-ray. I'm still trying to get the prints out. So I'm still taking care of the movie.
Here at Ramaskrik, we're screening two of your movies, Re-Animator, the first ever movie that you produced, and Society, your directorial debut. It's Re-Animator is the only one that's been screened now. How do you feel the audience have reacted to?
Well, I didn't sit through Re-Animator.
Okay.
I just watched the beginning. Yeah. But most everybody stayed for the Q&A. They all seem to have enjoyed it. It's interesting how an old movie can survive, that it can have such a good shelf life. Most movies don't, of course, but I think Re-Animator is pretty special. It really still works.
Speaking of old movies, Re-Animator was screened from a 35mm print.
Yeah, it was actually one of the original release prints. So I ended up with all the release prints of the movie, and so that was that print was from 1985.
Cool. Which of your movies produced or directed are you most satisfied with yourself? Which one do you hold dearest?
I don't think there's any one like that, but certainly Re-Animator is very special because it's a classic. It's a real classic horror movie, and I'm a horror fan. And so for me, the idea that I was able to be involved in a classic is great. Yeah. As a horror fan. And I think Re-Animator is a horror classic. It's one of the best horror movies, at least of the 1980s. But, when you look at the modern era of horror, there's certainly an era of horror that I believe began with Night of the Living Dead and went all the way up until when everything went digital. Maybe in the 2000s, yes. Things changed. From the drive-in time of Night of the Living Dead through the video era into the DVD era, And that's kind of a certain block of time of horror. I think after, in the digital time, maybe in the past 10 years, things have changed a bit. I think it's a little, maybe it's just the ending of that, but I'm not sure if we're not into another type of horror movie that in many ways is references the movies of the 70s and 80s and 90s, but maybe they're going to have maybe something different is going to come out of it just because of the different distribution. I think in the 70s it was drive-ins, and in the 80s and it was VHS, into the 90s, and the distribution and the financing was such that there was many people could make movies. With digital, it's completely different because the way movies are made is different, and and plus because of the internet and digital, even just with DVDs and Blu-rays, everybody can become an expert at movies. You can see anything, and you can find out how to make it and how they're done and get all the backstory. And so I think today the people who are making movies, and I'm just going to stick looking at the horror ones because that's what I like. I think they know so much, or can know it. I'm not saying that they maybe understand it within the context of its time, but they know so much, and it's so easy to shoot a movie. You can do it with your phone. Literally, you can do that, and you can do it without any professional people being involved. And so people just do whatever they want, and there's a sense that just making any movie is a very artistic event that you have to write, you have to produce, you have to direct, you have to edit, you have to do everything to be the singer-songwriter. Whereas in the 70s and 80s and 90s, yes, the director was very important and very tied to it. But I don't think there wasn't this overriding idea that when we were making horror movies, it was some sort of artistic or political statement. It was just that we liked them, and we were doing it so other people would watch them. And now I get the feeling I watch these movies and I feel like they're trying to be something else other than that.
Yeah, a message. Yes.
Yeah.
But speaking of a message in movies, we have to talk a little bit about Society. Society is one of my favorite horror movies and movies of all time, actually. There's a message in Society.
Well, there is. It's not something that I think every movie reflects its era. You don't have to try to make a message out of it. But Society just happened to, already the story had some elements in it that I tried to bring out stronger, and it was just part of that story. The intention of Society wasn't to make a statement, but to have fun, and to have fun with something that I think is it's kind of a cartoon. Of course, it's not anything you can't really look at it. It's too seriously, but it's a cartoon version of sort of our economic system, and any system. I mean, throughout history, there's always been people who dominate other people, from whether they were cavemen or Chinese emperors or whatever, Huns. And I think that relationship of the few people who tend to have the most, and this is the human condition, I think. And in Society, it kind of makes a sci-fi horror version of that. But it's really having fun with it. It wasn't the intention. It's kind of like when you watch something like Invasion of the Body Snatchers from the 50s. You go, well, was the intention, it reflected its time, but the movie works on the level of being a good sci-fi movie, sci-fi horror movie.
Yes.
And that to me, most, there is a type of horror movie that works that way. Most horror, I think, I would say society, yes, it has a political element. But the political element is interpreted in sci-fi horror terms. They're usually science fiction usually is more likely to have a political comment, and horror usually, in my opinion, is more focused on sex and death, religion, psychology, these types of things. Less than than sort of social commentary. And I think that's when we see a werewolf or some kind of movie that has to do with body transformation or being out of control, or the classic from before our times, the classic, the Wolfman, the Mad Doctor, the werewolf. These things are really about sex and death.
Yeah.
And when we look at the sci-fi, like, The Day the Earth Stood Still, or, those have more of a social commentary. Society kind of blends the two. It tells a story within sort of the teenage hijinks subgenre of the 80s. So it's like a high school comedy type movie.
Yeah.
But it's got paranoia, and then I always say it's a sucker punch, because it takes you to a place you didn't expect to go when you began.
Yeah, that's true. Speaking of places that you didn't expect the movie to go, the effects made by Screaming Mad George is really balls to the walls crazy. How was it working with George?
Well, I met George for that project, because the movie was being financed by Japanese financing at that time, and George is Japanese, and they asked me if I would meet him, because it would be good for the Japanese investors to have a Japanese person involved. And so I met him, and I went to his house, and he's more of an artist than an effects guy. He's a surrealist artist. And I love surrealism. I love expressionism, Dadaism. Those art forms. And even I've tried to use surrealism in movies before. In From Beyond, the poster, the original poster was taken from a Dali painting.
Oh, okay.
And that was well before Society. But when I saw George was really into surrealism and into kind of optical illusions in art, I went to his apartment, and we immediately were looking at Andalusian Dog, and we were going through Dali paintings. We were already picking out images from Dali paintings to put into the shunting. Now, the original script didn't have any effects. It didn't have any shunting, nothing fantastic. It was a blood cult.
Okay.
So it was the story. It was written by Woody Keith and Rick Fry, mostly Woody Keith, and he grew up in Beverly Hills, and he did have this paranoid idea about what his parents and what society was like. So a lot of this stuff were characters that he was playing with from his own experience, and the paranoia, I think, was the overriding. Was the thing that attracted me to the script. But at the end, I liked the idea that there was this impossible kind of paranoia that this boy has, and this teenage boy, and he's somebody who has everything. He has rich parents. He's very popular at school. He's an athletic star. But he's paranoid. His life is terrible, and so the idea that there's these impossible kinds of things that are happening, and then we find out at the end that it's true. But at the end in the script, it was a blood cult. And when I got to that point, I thought, wow, I really like this, but I want something with effects, something stranger than just killing. I'm not, it doesn't do enough for me. And so that's when I began thinking, well, what would I like to see? And when I imagined what I'd like to see, I was thinking, what haven't I seen in the movies that I'd like to see? And I thought about people's bodies melding into one another. And I thought, I'd like to see that. So let's do that and figure out a way to explain it. And so that's what we did.
Yeah, it's definitely an awesome movie. Do you have any upcoming projects?
Well, I'm trying to do... I've been working with... I have a partner, and we actually get involved with... One of the things we do is get involved with kind of new filmmakers who are maybe making micro-budget movies, and we act as a producer's rep for them and help them make their distribution deals and help them with the contracts and to negotiate the sales agent to make sure that if the movie has any value, they will get some money out of it. They won't lose everything. And, of course, the movie doesn't have value. They'll lose everything anyway. But then we don't get anything either. It's not a great business. It could be if we get a big hit. But it's fun to deal with people. And we also will start with even with finding a writer or we have a movie out now called Reborn with Barbara Crampton. And on that one we help present options for a writer, help develop the script for the producer, help interview directors, and help give advice to the extent that the producer wants it, or we're working on one now that it's a director producer, and we'll look at the script and we look at the cut, and we'll help try to sell it. So that's kind of fun. I enjoy doing that. But on the other hand, theoretically, I've got a deal to make one more Re-Animator, the last one with Jeffrey,
Yeah.
And so it's called Re-Animator Unbound.
Ah, okay.
So that's interesting, very challenging. And I'm working on a couple of TV series. I really want to get a series,